The first light of dawn spread across the rolling hills of the Montana Territory, turning the endless prairie into a sea of gold. Frost clung to every blade of grass, and thin trails of smoke rose from the chimneys of scattered homesteads. It was the kind of morning that made strangers believe the frontier was a land of endless opportunity. But the people who lived there knew better. The West rewarded hard work, yet it offered no mercy when drought, sickness, or bad luck came knocking. Outside a weathered cabin several miles from the town of Ash Creek, Nathan Carter stepped onto his porch with an axe resting across his shoulder. His boots were worn through at the heels, his flannel shirt had been patched more times than he could remember, and the cold morning air stung his face. He paused for a moment and looked toward the distant mountains. There had been a time when he greeted each sunrise with confidence. Back then, those same mountains had reminded him of possibility. Now they reminded him of everything he had lost. Inside the cabin, a tiny voice called out, "Daddy?" Nathan immediately set the axe aside and hurried back indoors. His 2-year-old son, Samuel, stood in his little wooden crib with sleepy eyes and messy blonde curls sticking out in every direction. The boy stretched out his tiny arms. Nathan smiled, and for a brief moment, every burden disappeared. "Well, good morning, little cowboy." Samuel giggled. Nathan lifted him into the air, pretending the boy was flying like a hawk over the plains. Samuel laughed so loudly that the tiny cabin seemed warmer despite the cold outside. "You hungry?" Samuel nodded enthusiastically. Nathan carried him to the small table where breakfast waited. Or rather, what was left of breakfast. One small biscuit, a spoonful of apple preserves, half a cup of watered-down oatmeal. Nathan quietly placed most of it onto Samuel's plate. The little boy happily began eating. "Daddy?" "Yes?" "You eat." Nathan smiled. "I already did." It was a lie. Samuel was too young to know the difference. Nathan watched his son enjoy every bite while pretending he wasn't hungry himself. As Samuel ate, Nathan's eyes wandered toward a faded photograph hanging on the wall. Sarah, his wife. Her smile seemed frozen in time. The picture had been taken during their first spring on the ranch, long before tragedy found them. Nathan walked over and gently dusted the frame. "You'd be proud of him," he whispered. "He laughs just like you." For a moment, he simply stood there, remembering. He remembered the first time he met Sarah at a church picnic. She had beaten every man in the horseshoe contest. She laughed louder than anyone else. She believed every problem could be solved if people were willing to help each other. When Nathan proposed, he owned little more than 40 acres, a handful of cattle, and an old cabin. Sarah never cared. "We'll build everything else together," she had told him. And they had. The ranch slowly grew. Every calf born felt like another promise fulfilled. Every fence repaired brought another dream closer. When Samuel arrived, they believed life couldn't become more perfect. Then came the drought. It began with one unusually dry summer. The creek slowed. The grass turned brown. Nathan believed the rains would return. They never did. The following year was worse. Without water, cattle weakened. Disease spread through the herd. Coyotes attacked the stragglers. Nathan sold animal after animal simply to pay debts. By the time the rains finally returned, there were almost no cattle left to save. Sarah remained hopeful. "We've survived hard times before." Nathan wanted to believe her. But that winter fever swept through Ash Creek. Families everywhere became sick. Doctors rode from ranch to ranch with little medicine and even less hope. Sarah fell ill in January. Nathan hardly left her bedside. For 6 days he prayed. For 6 nights he begged God not to take her. On the 7th morning she smiled weakly. Nathan held her trembling hand. She reached toward the tiny cradle where Samuel slept peacefully. "Promise me something." "I promise anything. No matter how hard life becomes. Raise him to be kind." Nathan struggled to answer. Tears blurred his vision. "I promise." Sarah gently touched his cheek one final time. Then she was gone. Nathan often wondered whether his own heart had stopped beating that morning. Somehow, it hadn't. because Samuel still needed him. From that day forward, Nathan became father and mother. He learned to braid tiny blankets around Samuel during cold nights. He learned to cook, though his biscuits were usually burned. He learned lullabies despite singing terribly. Every mistake made Samuel laugh. Those laughs kept Nathan moving. But love alone could not fill empty cupboards. Every morning Nathan searched for work. One day he repaired fences. The next he split firewood. Sometimes he unloaded freight wagons until his hands bled. Other times he shoveled manure in exchange for supper. If someone offered honest work, Nathan accepted without complaint. No task was beneath him. His reputation soon became well known. If Nathan says he'll finish a job, he finishes it. Even so, hard work could not overcome bad fortune forever. The little savings he had managed to collect slowly disappeared paying medical bills after Samuel developed a stubborn cough. The town doctor examined the child carefully. It's settling in his chest. Nathan's face tightened. Will he recover? I believe so. What does he need? The old doctor smiled kindly. Warmth, rest, and fresh milk every day. Nathan nodded. I'll get it. He meant every word. The problem was, fresh milk had become expensive after several dairy herds suffered disease earlier that year. Nathan counted his remaining coins that evening. 23 cents. Almost everything he owned. He stared at the tiny pile for a long time before placing them carefully into his pocket. The next morning, he walked nearly 4 miles into Ash Creek, carrying Samuel wrapped tightly against his chest. The little boy coughed several times along the journey. Each cough felt like a knife twisting deeper into Nathan's heart. The streets of Ash Creek buzzed with activity. Merchants unloaded crates. Blacksmiths hammered glowing iron. Children chased one another around wagons. Cowboys laughed outside the saloon. Life continued as though no one noticed the struggles of others. Nathan entered Miller's general store. The smell of fresh bread, coffee beans, leather, and flour filled the building. Rows of canned goods lined the shelves. Fresh produce rested near the windows. Behind the counter stood Walter Miller. Morning, Nathan. Morning. What can I get you? Nathan emptied his coins onto the wooden counter. 1 bottle of fresh milk. Walter counted the money. You'll have 3 cents left. Nathan nodded. Walter wrapped the bottle carefully in brown paper. Your boy feeling better? Doctor says this should help. I hope it does. Nathan thanked him sincerely. He picked Samuel up again. As they stepped onto the busy boardwalk, Nathan felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. It wasn't much, just 1 bottle of milk. But to a father with almost nothing, it meant everything. He held Samuel close with one arm, while carefully carrying the milk in the other. They had only crossed half the street when shouting erupted nearby. Look out! A team of horses pulling a heavily loaded freight wagon suddenly bolted after being startled by the blast of a dropped crate. The driver pulled desperately on the reins. The horses ignored him. People scattered in every direction. Nathan had only seconds to react. He didn't think about himself. He thought only about Samuel. Wrapping both arms around his son, he threw himself toward the wooden boardwalk just as the wagon thundered past. The horses missed them by inches. Samuel began crying from the fright. Nathan immediately checked every part of his son's tiny body. No cuts, no bruises. You're all right. Only then did he notice the silence around him. The brown paper wrapping had slipped from his hand. The glass bottle lay shattered across the dusty street. White milk spread through the dirt until there was nothing left. Nathan stared without speaking. Every last coin he owned, gone in an instant. A woman nearby quietly covered her mouth. An elderly rancher removed his hat. No one laughed. No one mocked him. The sight of a father kneeling beside spilled milk while comforting his frightened child was simply too heartbreaking. Nathan slowly gathered the broken pieces of glass so no horse or child would be injured later. He thanked the people who asked if he was hurt. Then he carried Samuel home. That evening, The little boy coughed more than ever. Nathan sat beside his bed, long after sunset. The cabin was silent, except for the crackling fire and Samuel's breathing. Nathan looked once more at Sarah's photograph. "I promised you I'd take care of him." His voice broke. "I don't know how anymore." He bowed his head and prayed. Not for wealth, not for success, only for enough strength to keep his promise one more day. When morning came, Nathan made a difficult decision. He carefully collected every piece of broken glass into a cloth sack, folded the original receipt, dressed Samuel in his warmest coat, and began the long walk back into Ash Creek. He wasn't going to ask for charity. He wasn't going to beg. He simply hoped that perhaps, just perhaps, the storekeeper might exchange the milk that fate had stolen. Nathan had no idea that before the day ended, one quiet moment inside that general store would change not only his life, but the future of an entire town. The morning sun climbed higher over Ash Creek, but it did little to warm the crisp autumn air. A steady breeze swept dust along the wooden boardwalk, carrying with it the sounds of wagon wheels, horses' hooves, and merchants calling out their daily bargains. Nathan Carter walked slowly toward Miller's General Store, with Samuel sleeping quietly against his shoulder. The little boy's breathing was heavier than it should have been, and every few moments a small cough escaped his chest. Nathan tightened the blanket around him. "Just a little farther, son." His own stomach was empty, but he hardly noticed anymore. Hunger had become a familiar companion. What troubled him far more was the thought that he might fail the only person in the world who still depended on him. When he reached the store, Nathan hesitated before opening the door. He disliked asking anyone for help. His father had raised him with one simple belief: a man's word is worth more than his money, but he should never expect another man to carry his burdens. Nathan still believed those words. That was why returning to the store filled him with embarrassment. He wasn't asking for a gift. He only hoped for understanding. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open. A small brass bell jingled overhead. The store bustled with customers buying flour, coffee, nails, lamp oil, and sacks of grain. Housewives compared prices, while ranch hands joked near the counter. The warm smell of fresh bread drifted from the bakery shelves. Walter Miller looked up from his ledger. "Back again, Nathan?" Nathan removed his hat respectfully. "Morning, Mr. Miller." Walter nodded. "What can I do for you?" Nathan carefully unfolded the receipt he had carried in his pocket. "I know this is unusual." Walter waited. "Yesterday, after I left here, there was an accident. The wagon horses bolted. I dropped the bottle trying to protect my boy." Walter glanced toward Samuel, who was sleeping peacefully. Nathan continued quietly. "I picked up every piece of glass. I know the milk was mine once I bought it. I'm not asking for something free. If you could exchange it, I'll work to repay you." The room became noticeably quieter. Several customers stopped talking. A rancher standing near the stove slowly turned around. A young mother carrying her groceries looked toward Nathan with sympathy. Walter sighed. "Nathan!" "You know I respect you. But business is business." Nathan nodded. "I understand. If I replace your milk, I'll have to replace everyone else's. It wouldn't be fair." Nathan lowered his eyes. "I suppose you're right." He picked up the folded receipt. "I'm sorry to trouble you." Before he could leave, Samuel began coughing violently. The sound echoed through the entire store. Nathan gently rubbed his son's back until the coughing eased. Walter shifted uncomfortably. For just a moment, his expression softened. But years of running a business had taught him that emotions often cost money. He looked away. "I'm sorry." Nathan forced a small smile. "No need to apologize. I appreciate your time." He placed his hat back on his head and turned toward the door. Not once did he complain. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he suggest anyone owed him anything. His quiet dignity left a deeper impression than anger ever could. Near the fabric counter stood a woman dressed entirely in black. Her gloves were made of fine leather. A silver brooch fastened her high-collared dress. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, and her eyes carried the weight of many lonely years. This was Eleanor Whitmore. Nearly everyone in Ash Creek recognized her immediately. Some lowered their voices when she entered a room. Others stood a little straighter. Children whispered, "That's the rich widow." Older folks simply tipped their hats. Her late husband, Charles Whitmore, had built one of the largest ranching operations in the Montana Territory. When he died unexpectedly from pneumonia 8 years earlier, many assumed Eleanor would sell everything and return east. Instead, she learned every part of the business herself. She studied cattle breeding. She negotiated freight contracts. She supervised ranch foremen. She settled disputes between ranchers. Within 5 years, the Whitmore Ranch had doubled in size. Men who once dismissed her because she was a woman now admitted, though often only in private, that she might be the finest business mind in the territory. Yet despite her success, Eleanor remained distant. She attended church every Sunday. She donated quietly to repair roads and schools. But she rarely smiled. She accepted no invitations to dances. She never remarried. Most people assumed she preferred solitude. Only her longtime housekeeper, Martha, knew the truth. Every evening, Eleanor visited the small cemetery outside town. There, beside Charles's grave, rested a tiny white headstone. Emily Whitmore, born and gone 3 days later. No child had ever called Eleanor mother. The silence left behind had never truly faded. Now, as she watched Nathan leave the store with Samuel in his arms, memories she had spent years burying suddenly returned. She remembered holding little Emily for the first time. She remembered praying through the night as the baby's fever rose. She remembered the helplessness. No amount of money had saved her daughter. The ache had never left. Samuel's coughing sounded painfully familiar. Eleanor remained still until the store door closed behind Nathan. Only then did she walk calmly toward Walter Miller. "How much?" Walter blinked. "For what?" "The bottle of milk." Walter shrugged. 20 cents. Without another word, Eleanor opened her handbag and removed a crisp $20 gold certificate. Walter's eyes widened. "Eleanor, you misunderstood. The milk only cost. I know exactly what it cost." She laid the bill gently on the counter. "This isn't payment for one bottle." Walter looked confused. "It's an account." The customers leaned closer. From the corner of the room, even the blacksmith stopped pretending not to listen. Eleanor spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Beginning today, if any child in Ash Creek needs milk, and the parents cannot afford it, you will provide it." Walter frowned. "Eleanor, that could become expensive." She nodded. "It probably will. I'll settle the account every month." Someone near the back of the store whispered, "Did she just say every child?" Another customer murmured, "She's serious." Walter rubbed the back of his neck. "What if people take advantage?" Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Some might, but I'd rather lose money helping 10 dishonest people than refuse one hungry child." Silence settled over the room. No one argued. Even Walter found himself unable to object. He slowly picked up the bill. "I'll do as you ask." Eleanor smiled gently. "No, you'll do better than that. You'll remember today." Walter lowered his eyes. "I believe I will." Outside, Nathan had nearly reached the edge of town. He never saw Eleanor step into her elegant carriage. Her driver approached. "Home, Mom?" She shook her head. "No, we're making a stop. First, buy fresh milk. The finest bread, eggs, vegetables, a sack of flour, medicine from Dr. Harris, and 2 warm wool blankets." The driver blinked. "Is someone ill?" "Yes, a little boy." Within an hour, the carriage rolled along the narrow trail leading toward Nathan's isolated cabin. Smoke drifted lazily from the stone chimney. The place was humble. The roof had been patched several times. The porch leaned slightly to one side. The fence surrounding the yard had missing rails. A tiny vegetable garden, now withered by autumn frost, showed evidence of careful tending. It wasn't a place built by laziness. It was a place worn down by hardship. Nathan looked up from splitting firewood as the carriage approached. He immediately set the axe aside, his face filled with confusion. He hurried over. "Mrs. Whitmore." She stepped down from the carriage. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter." Nathan removed his hat. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "I imagine not." The driver began unloading baskets. Nathan quickly stepped forward. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake." "There isn't." He looked inside the nearest basket. Fresh milk. Bread still warm from the oven. Butter. Cheese. Smoked ham. Fresh apples. Coffee. Beans. Sugar. More food than had entered his cabin in months. Nathan immediately stepped back. "I can't accept this." Eleanor expected the answer. "I didn't think you would." "I'm grateful, but I haven't earned it." Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. "Neither had my husband." Nathan frowned. "What do you mean?" "When Charles started his ranch, a stranger gave him his first breeding bull. He spent years trying to repay the man. The stranger refused. He said, 'Just help someone else when your turn comes.'" Nathan remained silent. Eleanor reached into her handbag and removed a folded document. "This isn't charity." She handed it to him. Nathan unfolded the paper. His eyes widened. It was an employment contract. Foreman, Whitmore North Ranch. Salary far higher than anything he had ever earned. Housing included. Medical care included. A school allowance for Samuel when he became old enough. Nathan looked up in disbelief. "You have dozens of experienced foremen." "I do. Why me?" Eleanor answered without hesitation. "Because yesterday, you protected your son instead of the milk. This morning, you returned asking to repay the loss instead of demanding someone else fix it. You thanked a man who refused you. That tells me everything I need to know." Nathan stared at the paper. "I've lost almost everything." Eleanor nodded. "I know. But you haven't lost your character, and that's far harder to replace." For the first time since Sarah died, Nathan felt someone truly saw him, not as a poor widower, not as a struggling laborer, not as a man to be pitied, but as someone whose integrity still had value. Tears filled his eyes despite every effort to hold them back. He looked toward the cabin where Samuel stood at the window, waving with a bright smile. Nathan whispered, "My wife always believed God sends help through people." Eleanor smiled softly. "My husband believed the same thing." Nathan extended his hand. "I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired." Eleanor shook it firmly. "I already believe you will." As the carriage rolled away later that afternoon, several townspeople who had quietly followed at a distance exchanged stunned glances. The wealthy widow had not merely given away groceries. She had entrusted one of her largest ranches to a man who, only hours earlier, could not afford a bottle of milk. Before sunset, the entire town of Ash Creek would be talking about Eleanor Whitmore's astonishing decision. Some would call it generosity. Some would call it foolishness. And one powerful man, watching events unfold from the porch of the First Territorial Bank, would quietly decide that Nathan Carter's rise threatened plans he had spent years putting into motion. His name was Horace Talbot, and he was already plotting how to bring both the single father and the wealthy widow crashing back down. Chapter 3. A Town Turns Against Kindness. Expanded. The news spread through Ash Creek faster than a prairie fire driven by a summer wind. By sunrise, the morning after Eleanor Whitmore hired Nathan Carter as foreman of her northern ranch, every barber, blacksmith, shopkeeper, and ranch hand in town seemed to have an opinion. Some admired her decision. Others questioned her judgment. And a few openly predicted disaster. At Miller's General Store, where the story had begun, customers gathered around the old potbelly stove despite the mild weather. "I hear she hired that poor widower. I heard she gave him enough food to last a month. They say she's paying him more than most foremen. No man goes from returning broken milk bottles to managing one of the biggest ranches in Montana, Walter Miller quietly stocked shelves while pretending not to listen. But every word settled heavily on his conscience. He replayed yesterday's conversation again and again. Nathan had never begged. He had never complained. He had simply asked for a chance. Walter sighed. I should have handled that differently. His wife, Clara, looked over from the bookkeeping desk. You were following business. Walter nodded slowly. Maybe, but somewhere along the way, I forgot business serves people. Not everyone shared Walter's growing regret. Across town, inside the polished office of the First Territorial Bank, Horace Talbot sat behind a massive oak desk. Everything about Horace reflected wealth. His tailored suits arrived from Chicago. His boots were custom-made. His office overlooked the busiest street in Ash Creek, a reminder that money gave a man both comfort and influence. Yet no amount of wealth had ever satisfied him. He wanted more. For years, Horace had watched Eleanor Whitmore with growing interest. Not because he admired her, because he admired what she owned. The Whitmore Ranch covered thousands of acres. Its cattle contracts reached as far as St. Louis. Its timber business supplied growing towns throughout the territory. Horace had spent years trying to convince Eleanor to sell portions of her empire. She had politely refused every offer. Now she had done something even worse. She had chosen compassion over profit. To Horace, that was dangerous. Very dangerous. He leaned back in his chair as his business partner, Edwin Cross, entered. You've heard? Edwin nodded. The whole town has. Horace smirked. Excellent. Edwin looked confused. I thought you'd be upset. I am. But public opinion can be useful. He stood and walked toward the window. People don't fear generosity. They fear what generosity costs them. Edwin frowned. I don't understand. Horace smiled. They'll believe she's wasting money. They'll wonder who's paying for it. They'll question every decision she makes. And once doubt begins, it spreads all by itself. Edwin slowly nodded. You think they'll turn against her? I know they will. Meanwhile, nearly 15 miles north of Ash Creek, Nathan rode toward Whitmore North Ranch. The ranch stretched farther than the eye could see. Rolling hills covered in golden grass, large cattle herds grazing peacefully, several sturdy barns, 2 bunkhouses, a blacksmith shop, horse corrals, windmills turning slowly against the bright blue sky. Nathan had never seen property so vast. Waiting near the main barn stood the ranch's longtime manager, Caleb Dawson. Caleb was nearly 60, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a grey beard and weathered hands that spoke of decades spent working the land. He removed his hat respectfully. You must be Nathan. Nathan offered a handshake. Pleasure to meet you. Caleb smiled. I've heard plenty already. Nathan laughed awkwardly. I imagine not all of it good. Caleb shrugged. Depends who was talking. He motioned toward the ranch. Come, I'll show you around. As they walked, Caleb explained the operation. The north pasture needs new fencing. We've lost calves through that broken section. The eastern barn roof leaks. Several horses need shoeing. Our books are behind. Nathan listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pretend to know everything. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions. How long has the fence been broken? Which workers know carpentry? Where do we lose the most feed? Caleb quietly smiled. Most new foremen spent their first day giving orders. Nathan spent his first day learning. By evening, the ranch hands gathered for supper inside the bunkhouse. Conversation stopped as Nathan entered. Nearly 20 men looked up. Some nodded politely. Others simply stared. Nathan recognized the expressions immediately. They weren't convinced. One tall ranch hand named Buck Jensen finally spoke. So, you're the famous milkman. Laughter echoed around the room. Nathan smiled. I suppose I am. Buck looked surprised. You ain't offended? Nathan shook his head. If protecting my son becomes the thing I'm remembered for, I can live with that." The laughter faded. Several men exchanged curious glances. That wasn't the answer they expected. Buck stood. He walked toward Nathan. For several tense seconds, no one spoke. Then Buck extended his hand. "Fair enough. My name's Buck." Nathan shook it firmly. "Nathan." By the end of supper, conversations flowed naturally. Nathan asked each man about his family. He remembered every name. He listened more than he talked. Without realizing it, he had already earned something more valuable than authority: respect. The next morning, before sunrise, Nathan was already working. The cook, Mrs. Agnes Porter, nearly dropped her coffee pot when she saw him carrying lumber toward the damaged fence. "You know that's a 2-day job." Nathan smiled. "Then I'd better get started." One by one, ranch hands arrived expecting to find the foreman waiting with instructions. Instead, they found him digging post holes, driving nails, stretching heavy fencing wire, sweating alongside everyone else. Buck leaned toward another cowboy. "I ain't never seen a foreman work first. Neither had anyone else." Within days, small changes began appearing across the ranch. Nathan reorganized feed storage to reduce waste. He repaired broken wagon wheels instead of replacing them. He asked experienced workers for ideas instead of assuming he had all the answers. When a young ranch hand accidentally broke expensive harness equipment, he expected to be fired. Instead, Nathan simply said, "Everybody breaks something. The important question is, what did you learn?" The young man answered honestly, "I rushed." Nathan nodded. "Then don't rush tomorrow." Word spread quickly. People wanted to work harder, not because they feared punishment, but because they respected the man leading them. By the end of the first month, something remarkable had happened. Feed costs had dropped. Fence repairs finished ahead of schedule. No cattle had been lost. The ranch's books balanced for the first time in over a year. Even Caleb admitted privately to Eleanor, "I've worked ranches 40 years. I've never seen men this eager." Eleanor smiled. "I thought you might. But success always attracts attention, especially from those who resent it." One afternoon, Horace Talbot rode onto the ranch, wearing polished boots completely unsuited for ranch work. Nathan greeted him politely. "Good afternoon." Horace forced a smile. "You must be Mr. Carter. I've heard impressive things." Nathan nodded. "Thank you." Horace looked around. "You've made quite an impression." "I'm only doing my job." Horace studied him carefully. The humility appeared genuine. That irritated him even more. Most men could be manipulated through greed, others through pride. Nathan displayed neither. That made him dangerous. As Horace prepared to leave, he noticed Samuel sitting near the porch carving little animals from scraps of wood beside Caleb. The little boy waved enthusiastically. Horace waved back with a practiced smile. But inside, his thoughts grew darker. The father has become popular. The widow trusts him. The workers admire him. If this continues, I'll never gain influence over Whitmore Ranch. He rode away already considering new strategies. Back in Ash Creek, Eleanor quietly continued another project no one expected. Every week she visited Miller's General Store to settle the growing milk account. Walter kept careful records. One afternoon, he placed the ledger in front of her. "You've helped 23 families already." Eleanor smiled. "Have any abused it?" Walter thought for a moment. "No. In fact, several parents came back later and paid anyway." Another week passed. A rancher's wife returned 6 cents she had borrowed. Then another family repaid 12 cents. Another left fresh eggs instead of money. Another delivered vegetables from their garden. Walter stared at the growing pile of repayments. He looked at Eleanor. "I was wrong." She looked up. "About what?" "I thought kindness would make people lazy. Instead, it's making them generous." Eleanor closed the ledger. "Kindness has a way of multiplying." Walter quietly nodded. "I think that's true." As winter approached, Samuel's health improved dramatically. The daily milk strengthened him. His cheeks became rosy again. His laughter echoed across the ranch. One chilly evening, Eleanor visited unexpectedly. Samuel ran across the yard as fast as his tiny legs could carry him. "Miss Ellie!" Without hesitation, he wrapped both arms around her waist. Eleanor froze. No child had embraced her in years. She slowly knelt. "Well, good evening to you too." Samuel proudly showed her a wooden horse Nathan had carved for him. "Daddy made it. It's beautiful. He says one day I'll ride a real one. I'm certain you will." Nathan watched from the porch. For the first time since Sarah's death, the yard no longer felt empty. As Eleanor prepared to leave, Samuel tugged gently on her sleeve. "Miss Ellie? Yes? Thank you for my milk." The simple words struck her harder than she expected. She swallowed carefully before answering. "You're very welcome." That evening, as her carriage rolled back toward town beneath a sky filled with countless stars, Eleanor looked out across the quiet prairie. For years, she had believed the ache left by losing her daughter could never soften. Yet somehow, a little boy with messy blonde curls and a grateful smile had begun healing wounds she thought time never could. But in another part of Ash Creek, beneath the warm glow of a banker's office lamp, Horace Talbot unfolded a map of the Whitmore Ranch and summoned two men he trusted for all the wrong reasons. "If honesty cannot destroy Nathan Carter," he said coldly, "then we'll give the town a reason to doubt him." The two men exchanged uneasy glances. Horace leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "By the time winter is over, everyone, including Eleanor Whitmore, will believe she made the worst mistake of her life." Outside, the wind howled across the empty prairie, carrying with it the first warning of the storm that was about to descend upon the Carter family and the Whitmore Ranch. Winter settled over the Montana Territory with a quiet determination that only the frontier truly understood. Snow blanketed the rolling hills surrounding Whitmore North Ranch, covering fences, wagon trails, and open pasture in brilliant white. The cattle huddled together against the biting wind, while smoke rose steadily from the chimneys of bunkhouses where ranch hands warmed themselves before another day's labor. Despite the harsh season, the ranch had never run better. For the first time in years, every fence line had been repaired before the heavy snow arrived. The barns were stocked with enough hay to last until spring. The horses were healthy. The cattle losses had dropped to almost nothing. Even the ranch books showed something Eleanor Whitmore had not seen in years, a larger profit than expected. Caleb Dawson closed the ledger with a satisfied smile. "I've been keeping records for 30 years. I've never seen expenses this low." Nathan looked over the figures. "We couldn't have done it without everyone pulling together." Buck Jensen laughed. "There he goes again." Nathan looked confused. "What? Every time somebody compliments you, you somehow make it about everybody else." The men around the table chuckled. Nathan simply smiled. "Because it's true." That answer earned another round of laughter. Outside the office window, Samuel played in the fresh snow with Scout, the large shepherd mix Nathan had rescued from an abandoned mining camp months earlier. Scout had wandered onto the ranch, nearly starved to death. His ribs showed through his coat. One ear carried an old scar. Many people believed the aging dog wasn't worth saving. Nathan disagreed. Every evening he fed the animal from his own supper until Scout regained his strength. Since then, the dog never left Samuel's side. Wherever the little boy went, Scout followed. The two had become inseparable. Samuel threw a snowball. Scout bounded after it, barking happily. The sight made every ranch hand smile. Life finally seemed peaceful. But peace often attracts envy. A dangerous conversation. Across town, inside the First Territorial Bank, Horace Talbot stared at a map spread across his desk. Beside him stood two men. One was Leonard Pike, a ranch hand recently dismissed from another ranch for gambling away his wages. The other was Silas Boone, a drifter willing to do almost anything for enough money. Horace poured 3 glasses of whiskey. "I have a job." Neither man spoke. "It requires discretion," Leonard finally asked. What's the pay? Horace slid a small leather pouch across the desk. Gold coins clinked together. Half now. The rest, afterward. Silas looked inside the pouch. There must be $50 here. There is. What exactly do you want? Horace folded his hands. I don't want anyone hurt. I simply need Nathan Carter to lose Eleanor Whitmore's trust. Leonard frowned. How? Horace smiled. The easiest way to ruin an honest man is to make everyone believe he stole something. The payroll. Every 3 months, Eleanor personally delivered payroll for the Northern Ranch. The wages were carried in a heavy iron lockbox. Inside rested nearly $3,000 in cash, enough to pay every ranch hand through the winter. Nathan had developed a simple system. When Eleanor arrived, he counted every dollar alongside Caleb. Then both men signed the ledger. Only afterward were wages distributed. The system had worked perfectly. Until now. 2 nights before payday, Leonard Pike quietly slipped into the ranch office after everyone had gone to bed. Using a duplicate key Horace had secretly obtained years earlier from a dishonest former employee, Leonard opened the office. He didn't touch the payroll. Not yet. Instead, he loosened one window latch from the inside. Then he disappeared into the darkness. The following evening, Horace rode into town, making certain several respectable citizens saw him dining publicly at the hotel. He wanted witnesses. While everyone believed he was in town, Leonard returned to the ranch, through the loose window. Within moments, he carried the payroll box outside. Silas waited with 2 horses. The men vanished into the snowy night. Morning shock. Nathan arrived at the office before sunrise. The lock appeared untouched. He unlocked the door. Everything looked normal, until he reached the safe. The iron payroll box was gone. For several seconds he simply stared. Then his stomach tightened. No. He checked every shelf, every cabinet, every drawer. Nothing. Caleb rushed inside. What happened? Nathan answered quietly. The payroll's gone. Caleb's face turned pale. What? Within minutes, the ranch erupted into confusion. Workers searched every building, every wagon, every storage shed. Nothing. Buck removed his hat. Maybe somebody moved it. Nathan slowly shook his head. No one would. A rider immediately left for Ash Creek to notify Eleanor and the sheriff. Suspicion arrives. Sheriff Amos Reed reached the ranch before noon. He had served Ash Creek for nearly 20 years. He believed in evidence, not rumors. Tell me everything. Nathan explained every detail, exactly as it happened. No exaggeration. No excuses. The sheriff examined the office carefully. The door wasn't forced. No. The safe wasn't damaged. No. Who had keys? Nathan answered honestly. Myself, Caleb, and Mrs. Whitmore. Sheriff Reed nodded thoughtfully. By late afternoon, Eleanor arrived. She listened quietly while Nathan repeated everything once more. Their eyes met. Nathan could see disappointment. Not accusation, only sadness. I've failed you, Eleanor answered softly. No, we've suffered a loss. Those are different things. Before anyone could continue, one of the deputies approached. Sheriff. We found footprints. Everyone hurried outside. The prints led away from the office, across the yard, toward Nathan's small cabin. The gathered ranch hands exchanged uneasy glances. Buck frowned. That don't make sense. The sheriff followed the tracks carefully. Snow had preserved every step. The trail ended beneath Nathan's porch. Sheriff Reed removed his hat. I'm sorry. I have to search. Nathan stepped aside immediately. You have every right. Samuel clung tightly to his father's leg. Daddy? Nathan smiled gently. It's all right, buddy. Everything's going to be all right. But even Nathan wasn't certain. The discovery. The deputies searched the cabin. Nothing. Then one deputy tapped the wooden floor beneath Nathan's bed. Hollow. He pried up a loose board. Everyone watched silently. Inside rested the missing payroll box. For a long moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Buck whispered, "No." Caleb closed his eyes. Samuel looked around in confusion. Nathan stared at the box as though seeing it for the first time. "I've never—" His voice failed him. Sheriff Reed slowly opened the box. The money remained untouched, exactly as it had been packed. The sheriff looked at Nathan. "I have to ask." Nathan interrupted quietly. "I know. I didn't take it. I've never seen that box beneath my floor." Some workers believed him instantly. Others looked uncertain. After all, the evidence appeared overwhelming. Eleanor stepped forward. Nathan met her eyes. He expected anger, disappointment, perhaps even dismissal. Instead, she asked only one question. "If I ask whether you're telling me the truth, what will you say?" Nathan answered without hesitation. "I'll say exactly what I've already said. I didn't steal your money. If you cannot believe me, I understand, but I won't lie to save myself." Silence followed. Finally, Nathan removed the ranch keys from his pocket. He placed them carefully into Eleanor's hand. "If my staying here harms the ranch, I'll leave." Several ranch hands protested. Buck stepped forward. "Boss." Nathan raised a hand gently. "No, sometimes leadership means accepting consequences, even when they aren't deserved." Samuel looked up with frightened eyes. "Daddy, are we going home?" Nathan knelt before him. "We'll go wherever God leads us, but we'll go together." Samuel wrapped his arms around his father's neck. "I love you." Nathan closed his eyes. "I love you too." Many of the hardened ranch hands quietly looked away. The one witness nobody expected. As everyone stood in stunned silence, Scout began barking. Once, twice, then continuously. The old shepherd circled Nathan, then raced toward the barn. Buck frowned. What's gotten into him? Scout barked louder. He returned, pulled gently at Buck's coat, then ran back toward the stable again. Sheriff Reed watched carefully. "Follow him." The men exchanged puzzled looks. Scout disappeared behind the largest haystack. His barking became frantic. The sheriff hurried over. Scout scratched wildly at the frozen ground. Buck helped move several bales of hay. Hidden behind them lay a small leather pouch. Sheriff Reed picked it up. Inside were 20 gold coins, along with a folded note. The sheriff opened it. His expression hardened. "What is it?" He handed the note to Eleanor. The handwriting read, "Half now, half after Carter falls. H.T." Buck frowned. "H.T.?" Before anyone could answer, Scout began running again. Straight toward the horse corrals, where Leonard Pike was quietly saddling his horse. The moment Leonard saw the sheriff approaching, he bolted. "Stop him!" Leonard leaped onto his horse. Buck and 2 ranch hands gave chase. Snow flew beneath pounding hooves. The pursuit thundered across the frozen pasture. Scout ran alongside the horses with astonishing speed. Leonard reached the creek crossing. His horse slipped on hidden ice. Man and horse crashed into the snow. Within moments, Buck tackled him before he could escape. Dragged back to the ranch, Leonard's confidence vanished when Sheriff Reed placed the leather pouch in front of him. "You have one chance. Tell the truth." Leonard remained silent. Then Scout growled low beside him. The frightened ranch hand finally broke. "It wasn't my idea! He paid me!" "Horace Talbot paid me." Gasps echoed through the crowd. "He told me where to hide the box. He said nobody would question it once they found it beneath Nathan's floor." Sheriff Reed folded his arms. "And the duplicate key? Horace gave it to me. And Silas, waiting outside town. Within an hour, deputies arrested Silas as well. He confirmed every detail." Truth restored. The sun was setting when Sheriff Reed walked back toward Nathan. The ranch stood completely silent. Every man waited. The sheriff removed his hat. "Nathan Carter, On behalf of this county, I owe you an apology. Nathan gently shook his head. You were doing your job. I know. But honest men deserve honest apologies. He extended his hand. Nathan accepted it. Buck suddenly shouted, I knew it! Laughter broke through the tension. Several ranch hands surrounded Nathan, shaking his hand one after another. Caleb smiled through misty eyes. I told you all. You can't fake character. Finally, Eleanor stepped forward. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, I never stopped believing in the man who chose his child over a bottle of milk. Nathan's eyes filled with emotion. I was afraid I'd disappointed you. You didn't. You reminded me why I trusted you. For the first time since the nightmare began, Nathan smiled. Not because his name had been cleared, but because trust had survived the storm. As the last light faded behind the snow-covered mountains, Horace Talbot sat alone in a jail cell in Ash Creek, staring through iron bars with hatred burning in his eyes. His plan had failed, not because of clever detectives or hidden documents, but because of the loyalty of an old ranch dog and the unshakable integrity of a man who refused to surrender his character. Neither Nathan nor Eleanor realized that the events of that winter would soon inspire something far greater than the clearing of one man's name. The entire town was about to witness a transformation that would forever change the meaning of wealth, generosity, and community in Ash Creek. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the Montana Territory. By late March, patches of green began pushing through the melting snow. The rivers, once locked beneath thick sheets of ice, flowed freely again, carrying fresh mountain water across the valleys. Meadowlarks returned to the fence posts, and cattle wandered eagerly into the new grass. To most of Ash Creek, spring meant another ranching season. To Eleanor Whitmore, it meant something else. A new beginning. For weeks after Horace Talbot's arrest, she spent long evenings alone in the study of her large ranch house. The room was lined with shelves of ledgers, maps, contracts, and business records collected over decades. Yet the papers that now covered her desk had little to do with profits. They were lists of families, widows, orphans, disabled veterans, small ranchers struggling beneath impossible debts, young couples trying to build their first homes, children who had no school beyond the 6th grade because they needed to work to help their parents survive. Martha, Eleanor's longtime housekeeper, quietly entered one evening, carrying a pot of tea. You've hardly slept this week. Eleanor smiled tiredly. I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. Martha chuckled. It usually is. She set the tea on the desk and glanced at the growing pile of notes. What are all these? Eleanor rested her hand on the papers. Plans. For the ranch? For the town? Martha raised an eyebrow. You've been generous before. This looks different. It is. Eleanor walked toward the window, overlooking miles of open pasture. When Charles and I first came here, we owned almost nothing. We succeeded because people gave us opportunities. A neighbor loaned us seed. A rancher shared breeding stock. A carpenter repaired our barn before we could afford to pay him. She looked toward the distant cemetery, where her husband rested. We spent years thanking them, but I don't think we thanked them enough. Martha smiled softly. So, now it's your turn. Eleanor nodded. No, it's all of our turn. Nathan learns the real meaning of leadership. A few days later, Eleanor invited Nathan to the Whitmore ranch house. Nathan felt slightly uncomfortable entering such a grand home. The polished hardwood floors reflected the afternoon sunlight. Family portraits lined the hallway. Books filled shelves from floor to ceiling. It was elegant without being extravagant. Eleanor welcomed him into the library. I need your opinion. Nathan looked surprised. Mine? I trust it. She spread several documents across the table. Nathan slowly read each page. As he finished, his eyes widened. You want to build a school? Yes. And a medical clinic? Yes. A grain warehouse? Yes. A loan fund for struggling ranchers? Eleanor nodded. Nathan looked at her in amazement. This could cost a fortune. It probably will. He sat quietly for several moments. Finally, he asked, "Why now?" Eleanor smiled. "Because I almost missed something important." Nathan waited. "When I watched you return that broken milk receipt, I realized something. I've spent years protecting my fortune, but I wasn't protecting people." Silence filled the room. Nathan thought about Sarah. She had often said something similar. Money should travel through your hands, not stop there. He smiled. "My wife would have liked you." Eleanor's eyes softened. "I wish I'd met her." "So do I." The town meeting. Word spread quickly that Eleanor Whitmore had called a public meeting. Nobody knew why. The church building overflowed with people. Farmers, ranchers, shopkeepers, teachers, widows, children. Even those who disliked Eleanor came out of curiosity. Sheriff Reed stood near the back. Walter Miller sat beside his wife. Buck Jensen arrived with several ranch hands. Caleb Dawson quietly found a seat near the front. Nathan remained beside the doorway, unsure why Eleanor had insisted he attend. As the church bell struck 7, Eleanor stepped to the front. The room fell silent. She looked around slowly. Faces filled every bench. Some hopeful, some skeptical, some simply curious. She took a deep breath. "When my husband and I first settled here, we believed success meant owning more land." Several people nodded. "We were wrong." The room grew still. Land can burn. Cattle can die. Money can disappear. But kindness becomes part of people. Her voice remained calm. "Several months ago, I watched a father return to a store asking only for a chance." Many people glanced toward Nathan. He wasn't asking for charity. He was asking for dignity. I almost walked away. Nathan lowered his eyes. "But God reminded me of something. Wealth has only one lasting purpose: to help others flourish." A quiet murmur spread through the church. Then Eleanor unfolded several papers. "Today, I am announcing the Whitmore Community Trust." Gasps echoed through the room. She continued. "The trust will fund several permanent programs." She paused before reading each one. "Every child under 5 years old will receive fresh milk if their family cannot afford it." Walter Miller smiled immediately. He already knew. No widow in Ash Creek will lose her home because she cannot pay winter taxes. Several women quietly wiped away tears. A community grain reserve will provide emergency food during droughts. Farmers exchanged surprised looks. A medical clinic will be built beside the church. Dr. Harris nearly stood from his seat. A schoolhouse twice the size of the current building will be constructed before next winter. The children burst into excited whispers. "And," she looked toward Nathan, "a work program will offer honest employment to anyone willing to earn a better life. Not handouts, not charity. Opportunity." The church became completely silent. People struggled to absorb everything they had heard. Then someone slowly began clapping. It was Walter Miller. Soon another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire building erupted into applause. Several people stood. Then everyone stood. Nathan remained frozen. He had never witnessed anything like it. A proud man changes. When the applause finally settled, Walter Miller slowly walked to the front. He removed his hat. "Eleanor." She looked at him. "I owe someone an apology." Walter turned toward Nathan. Months earlier, pride had kept him behind his counter. Now humility brought him forward. "I'm sorry." The church watched quietly. "I was more concerned about protecting my shelves than helping my neighbor." Nathan immediately shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." Walter smiled sadly. "I do. If I'd shown mercy that morning, perhaps I would have learned this lesson sooner." Nathan extended his hand. Walter ignored it. Instead, he embraced him. The church applauded once more. Several men smiled through tears. Even Sheriff Reed discreetly cleared his throat. An unexpected donation. One by one, townspeople began walking toward the front. Old Mrs. Jenkins offered 2 laying hens for widows who needed eggs. The blacksmith promised to repair farm tools free for struggling families. Dr. Harris volunteered 1 day each week, treating patients without charge. The carpenter pledged lumber for the new school. The baker promised fresh bread every Saturday for orphans. Buck Jensen stood. "I don't have much." He reached into his pocket. "But I've got $20. It's every extra penny I own. I'm giving it." The room fell silent again. $20 represented nearly a month's wages. Eleanor smiled. "Thank you." Others followed. Some offered money. Others offered labor. Some donated horses. Others gave blankets, seeds, firewood, clothing, books, or simply their time. By the end of the evening, Ash Creek had pledged far more than Eleanor expected. Not because anyone was wealthy, because everyone wanted to belong to something bigger than themselves. Nathan quietly whispered, "Sarah, you would have loved this." Horace watches from afar. From the second-floor window of the county jail, Horace Talbot could hear faint echoes of celebration drifting through town. A deputy walked past carrying a newspaper. The headline read, "Whitmore Creates Community Trust." Horace stared at it with bitterness. Everything he had tried to destroy had only grown stronger. Nathan's reputation had become legendary. Eleanor had become more respected than ever. The town had united instead of dividing. He crumpled the newspaper. "You fools," he muttered to himself. "You'll regret trusting people." The deputy shook his head. "No." He looked directly at Horace. "The only thing this town regrets is trusting the wrong man." Horace turned away without another word. A promise beneath the stars. That evening, after the celebration ended, Nathan walked Samuel home, beneath a sky filled with stars. The little boy held his father's hand tightly. "Daddy." "Yes, son." Why was everybody so happy? Nathan smiled. Because people remembered something. What? That helping each other makes everybody stronger. Samuel thought carefully. Then asked, "When I grow up, can I help people too?" Nathan knelt in the middle of the quiet road. He rested both hands on Samuel's shoulders. "You already do." "I do." Nathan nodded. "You reminded a whole town what kindness looks like." Samuel smiled. "I only drank milk." Nathan laughed warmly. Sometimes, the smallest things change the biggest hearts. From a distance, Eleanor watched the father and son walking home together. For the first time in many years, she no longer felt alone. She had lost a husband. She had lost a daughter. Those wounds would always remain. But now she had gained something unexpected. A family of the heart. She quietly whispered into the cool spring air. "Thank you, Charles. I think we're finally using our blessings the way we were meant to." The stars shone brightly over Ash Creek, as if heaven itself approved. Yet the greatest chapter of this story had not been written. For 5 years would pass, and the tiny act of returning one broken bottle of milk would grow into a legacy that reached far beyond the borders of Ash Creek. A little boy named Samuel would become living proof that kindness given in one generation can transform the lives of countless others in the next. 5 years passed, like the changing seasons across the Montana Territory. The little frontier town of Ash Creek no longer resembled the struggling settlement it had once been. Travelers arriving from neighboring counties often slowed their wagons as they entered town, surprised by what they saw. The dusty streets were cleaner. The storefronts had fresh coats of paint. Children in neatly mended clothes hurried toward a large white schoolhouse each morning, with books tucked beneath their arms. The small medical clinic beside the church welcomed patients from miles away. The community grain warehouse stood nearly full after several prosperous harvests, ready to help families whenever drought or hardship returned. Outside Miller's General Store, a wooden sign had been added beneath the front window. It read, "No child goes hungry in Ash Creek." Visitors often asked why. The townspeople simply smiled. It's a long story, and one worth hearing. A boy who never forgot. 9-year-old Samuel Carter raced down the main street on a chestnut pony nearly every afternoon after school. Scout, older now with a streak of gray around his muzzle, still ran faithfully beside him. The once fragile little boy had grown into a strong, cheerful child with bright blue eyes and the same gentle smile his mother had worn. Everyone in town knew Samuel. Not because he was the son of the Whitmore ranch foreman, but because he never passed anyone without offering to help. If an elderly widow struggled with groceries, Samuel carried them home. If a rancher dropped a sack of grain, Samuel was the first to lift it. If younger children argued, Samuel somehow convinced them to make peace before sunset. People often laughed. That boy was born with kindness in his pockets. Nathan smiled every time he heard it. He knew exactly where Samuel had learned it. Nathan's new beginning life had changed for Nathan as well. Under his leadership, Whitmore North Ranch had become one of the most respected cattle operations in the territory. Profits increased every year, but Nathan never forgot the days when he had counted every penny. Instead of chasing wealth, he quietly saved what he earned. 5 years after accepting Eleanor's offer, he purchased a modest ranch of his own. It wasn't large, only 200 acres, a sturdy farmhouse, a healthy herd, a flowing creek, enough land for an honest life. When he signed the deed, the land agent congratulated him. "You've done well." Nathan smiled. "I've been blessed." The man chuckled. Most folks would have said they worked hard. Nathan looked toward Samuel playing outside with Scout. "I did. But hard work alone didn't get me here." He never forgot the people who had opened doors when he couldn't open them himself. The school that changed everything. One spring morning, the new Ash Creek School held its annual celebration. Families gathered beneath colorful banners. Children displayed paintings, arithmetic lessons, and handwritten essays. Mrs. Abigail Turner, the schoolteacher, stood before the crowd. This year's essay contest asked one simple question. What makes a person truly rich? She smiled warmly. The winning essay belongs to Samuel Carter. The audience applauded as Samuel nervously walked to the front. He unfolded a slightly wrinkled sheet of paper. His voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. "When I was little, my daddy couldn't buy me milk." Several visitors exchanged puzzled glances. The townspeople already knew the story. Samuel continued. "A lady named Miss Ellie helped us. But Daddy says she didn't just give us milk. She gave us hope." He looked around the room. "I think rich people aren't the ones with the most money. I think they're the ones who leave the most kindness behind." Silence filled the schoolyard. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Then applause erupted. Mrs. Turner quietly wiped away tears. Nathan looked toward Eleanor. She simply smiled. A letter from the past. Several weeks later, an elderly lawyer from Helena arrived at Whitmore Ranch carrying a small wooden box. "I've been instructed to deliver this personally." Eleanor looked confused. The lawyer explained. "It belonged to your late husband. He asked that it be opened only after you had found peace." She slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested several old letters, a faded photograph, and Charles Whitmore's journal. Her hands trembled as she opened the final entry. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I've already gone home." Tears blurred her vision. "You always worried about protecting what we've built. I understand. But remember, the ranch isn't our greatest achievement. The people we help will always matter more than the land we own. Promise me, if life ever gives you more than you need, build tables, not fences. Love always. Charles." Eleanor closed the journal and cried quietly, not tears of sorrow. "Tears of gratitude," she whispered. "I finally understand." The last ride with Scout. Time, however, asks a price from everyone. One cool autumn afternoon, Scout no longer chased Samuel across the fields. Instead, the old dog rested beneath the large oak tree beside Nathan's porch. His breathing had become slow. His eyes had grown cloudy. Samuel sat beside him, gently stroking his graying fur. "Daddy, is Scout sick?" Nathan knelt quietly. "He's very old now." Samuel looked down. "I don't want him to leave." Neither did Nathan. Scout had been more than a dog. He had protected Samuel. He had guarded the ranch. He had uncovered the truth when no one else could. Most importantly, he had remained loyal until the very end. As the sun dipped below the mountains, Scout slowly lifted his head. He looked first at Samuel, then Nathan. His tail gave one final gentle wag. Peacefully, the faithful old dog closed his eyes for the last time. Samuel buried his face against Nathan's shoulder. Nathan held him tightly. "Some friends never really leave us. They stay here." He placed a hand over Samuel's heart. "And here." He touched his own. The next morning, the entire town attended Scout's burial beneath the oak tree. Even Sheriff Reed came. Buck Jensen built a simple wooden marker. On it he carved, "Scout, faithful until the end." No one considered it unusual that a whole town mourned one old ranch dog. Everyone knew what Scout had done. One final surprise. Years continued to pass. Eleanor's hair gradually turned silver. Though age slowed her steps, her mind remained sharp, and her compassion only deepened. Then, one peaceful winter evening, she quietly passed away in her sleep, at the age of 73. The church could not hold the crowd that gathered for her funeral. Ranchers came from neighboring territories, teachers, doctors, widows, children she had helped decades earlier, former orphans now raising families of their own. Even strangers traveled simply to honor the woman whose kindness had become legendary. After the service, Attorney Benjamin Hayes stood before the congregation. "I have been asked to read portions of Mrs. Whitmore's final will." The room became still. Many wondered who would inherit one of the largest fortunes in Montana. Benjamin unfolded the document. "To the Whitmore Community Trust. I leave the majority of my estate." A quiet murmur swept through the church. "The trust shall continue building schools, supporting hospitals, providing milk for children, helping honest families rebuild after hardship." Benjamin paused, then smiled. "To Nathan Carter." Nathan looked surprised. "I leave my husband's journal." "And $1. Soft laughter rippled through the room. Benjamin continued reading Eleanor's handwritten note. "Nathan, if I gave you money, you would spend it helping everyone else. Instead, I'm giving you something worth far more. Continue the work. Teach Samuel, and remind every generation that kindness is the only investment heaven guarantees will never lose its value." Nathan could no longer hold back his tears. The tradition. The following spring marked exactly 6 years since Nathan had returned that broken milk receipt. Before sunrise, he walked quietly toward Miller's General Store, carrying a single glass bottle filled with fresh milk. Walter, now older and slower, unlocked the front door just as Nathan approached. Nathan placed the bottle carefully on the wooden steps. Attached was a small handwritten note. Walter read it aloud. "For the next father or mother who believes hope has run out." Walter looked up. "You really think someone will need it?" Nathan smiled gently. "There always will be." That afternoon, a young widow named Rebecca entered the store, carrying her infant daughter. She searched every pocket, her eyes filled with embarrassment. "I'm 2 cents short." Before Walter could answer, he remembered the bottle outside. He smiled. "I think someone already paid for that." Rebecca looked confused. "What do I owe?" Walter shook his head. "Just promise me something." "What?" "When life gives you more than you need, help someone else." The young widow nodded through tears. "I will." Outside, Nathan watched quietly from across the street. He didn't step forward. He didn't explain. He simply smiled. Because he finally understood what Sarah had tried to teach him all those years ago. Kindness does not end with the person who gives it. It keeps traveling, from one heart to another, across generations. The story they told for years. Long after Nathan and Samuel were gone, parents in Ash Creek still told the story to their children. Not about the wealthy widow, not about the successful ranch, not even about the fortune she left behind. They told the story of a tired single father who refused to steal when he was desperate, of a woman wise enough to recognize integrity before success, of a faithful dog whose loyalty uncovered the truth, and of a single bottle of milk that became the beginning of a legacy. For in the Wild West, people often believed the strongest men were those who carried rifles, drove cattle, or claimed the most land. But the people of Ash Creek knew better. The strongest people were those who carried hope when others had none left. And whenever travelers noticed the weathered wooden sign outside Miller's General Store, "No child goes hungry in Ash Creek," they were seeing far more than a promise. They were seeing the legacy of one act of compassion that refused to end. Final moral lesson. True wealth is not measured by the land you own, the cattle you raise, or the gold you leave behind. It is measured by the hope you plant in others. A single act of kindness, offered with humility and wisdom, can outlive a lifetime, inspire generations, and become a legacy greater than any fortune ever could.